the ends justify the means. It's one of the most controversial ideas in history, a philosophy that has shaped rulers, dictators, warlords, and villains, both real and fictional. A principle whispered in the corridors of power and embedded in the darkest minds of history. You've seen them in movies. You've read about them in history books. The masterminds who manipulate, the rulers who stop at nothing, the cold, calculating figures who always seem 10 steps ahead. But what if I told you they're not just characters? What if I told you the same psychological strategies that create the most feared villains in history are still used today by leaders, CEOs, and even people in your daily life? This isn't just about villains. This is about power. And if you don't understand how it works, you'll always be at the mercy of those who do. Today, we dive into the dark psychology of villains through the teachings of one of history's most infamous minds, Niccolò Machiavelli. Stay until the end, because once you understand this, you'll never see the world the same way again. Niccolò Machiavelli was not a villain in the traditional sense. He was not a warlord nor a dictator. He never led armies nor conquered lands, and yet his name is feared. His work, The Prince, has been called a handbook for tyrants, a guide to manipulation, deception, and ruthless control. But here's the truth. Machiavelli didn't create evil. He exposed it. He studied the rulers of his time, dissecting their tactics, their psychological games, their ability to control the masses. And he wrote down their secrets, not to teach cruelty, but to reveal the nature of power. And what he found was simple. Morality is a weakness in the pursuit of power. A true villain, or rather a master of power, understands that emotions, ethics, and even truth itself are weapons to be used, not followed. One of Machiavelli's most famous principles is this: it is better to be feared than loved, if one cannot be both. Why? Because love is conditional. Love fades. People are loyal until they find something better. But fear is absolute. Fear is dependable. A villain understands this. They do not seek approval. They do not beg for loyalty. They create an environment where betrayal is unthinkable. This is why some of history's most terrifying leaders ruled through fear rather than kindness. They understood a fundamental truth about human nature. People respect strength. They obey power. And when forced to choose, they will follow the one they fear losing the most. Villains, real and fictional, do not fight fair. They do not rely on brute strength alone. They use psychology. They understand the weaknesses of the human mind. Machiavelli wrote, "Men are so simple and so much creatures of circumstance that he who seeks to deceive will always find someone who will allow himself to be deceived." This is the foundation of manipulation. A villain does not force people into submission. They make them believe they chose it. How? They play the victim, making others feel guilty for questioning them. They use half-truths, never lying outright, but twisting reality to suit their needs. They divide and conquer, keeping their enemies fighting among themselves while they remain untouchable. Take any great villain in history or fiction, and you'll see these tactics in play. They don't just fight their enemies. They control them without them even realizing it. One of the most controversial ideas Machiavelli promoted was that a leader must not hesitate to be ruthless. He wrote, A prince must not deviate from what is good, but he must be able to do evil when necessary. What does this mean? It means morality is flexible in the pursuit of power. It means that those who hesitate, those who cling to fairness in a world that does not reward fairness, will always lose. A villain understands this. They know that in a world where everyone plays dirty, the only way to survive is to be willing to go further than the rest. They strike before they are struck. They remove threats before they become dangerous. They are calculating, strategic, and willing to sacrifice anything to achieve their vision. This is why so many fictional villains resonate with us. Because deep down, we recognize that their strategies work. Now, here's a question. If villains are so cruel, so ruthless, so manipulative, why do we admire them? Why do we find characters like Joker, Walter White, Thanos, and Scarface so compelling? Because they embody something most people lack: complete and unapologetic power over their lives. They don't ask for permission. They don't beg for acceptance. They take control. And in a world where most people feel powerless, stuck in jobs they hate, trapped in social expectations, unable to stand up for themselves, villains represent the ultimate rebellion. This is why Machiavelli's teachings are still relevant today. Because, whether we admit it or not, we live in a world where power is not given, it is taken. And those who hesitate, they are left behind. Niccolò Machiavelli's principles were written over 500 years ago, but the game of power has never changed. Only the players have. The same psychological tactics used by tyrants, conquerors, and rulers of the past are still in play today, shaping the world in ways most people don't even notice. Machiavelli's core philosophy wasn't about violence or cruelty for its own sake. It was about control, about understanding human nature so deeply that you could bend it to your will. And if you look closely, you'll see that these same manipulative tactics are alive and thriving in modern politics, business, and personal relationships. 1. Politics, the rule of fear and division. Throughout history, rulers have weaponized fear to maintain their grip on power. Today's politicians may wear suits instead of armor, but their tactics are strikingly similar to those of Machiavelli's time. Fear is their greatest tool. Governments push the idea that without their leadership, chaos will take over. Leaders use scapegoats, blaming outsiders, immigrants, or the opposition for society's problems. They manufacture crises to justify extreme measures, keeping the public in a constant state of fear and dependency. The media, controlled by those in power, carefully selects what the masses should focus on, often pitting people against each other to create division. Machiavelli understood this well. He wrote, "Men are driven more by fear than by love. A leader who is feared has far more control than one who is merely liked." This is why authoritarian figures throughout history, whether dictators or so-called democratic leaders, thrive on fear-based tactics. When people are afraid, they don't think critically. They seek protection, not truth. And those in power are more than willing to provide that illusion of safety. The result? A population that willingly submits to control. 2. Business, the New Age feudalism. Once upon a time, kings ruled over peasants, and people worked for survival, not prosperity. Today, corporations have taken over that role. The modern CEO is the new king, and the employees are the new peasants. But here's the trick. Unlike past rulers, Today's corporate leaders don't control through whips and chains. They control through psychological manipulation. They brand overworking as passion and dedication. Employees are subtly guilt-tripped into working extra hours, often without extra pay, because they're made to believe that's what loyal employees do. They replace fair compensation with company culture. Instead of raises, they give perks like free coffee, casual Fridays, or an office ping pong table. Distractions that make employees forget they're being exploited. They create an illusion of replaceability. Workers are constantly reminded how lucky they are to have a job, instilling fear of unemployment that keeps them from pushing back. And the most Machiavellian trick of all, the illusion of upward mobility. Many companies dangle promotions like carrots, making employees believe that if they just work harder, they'll move up the corporate ladder. But in reality, most promotions are based on politics, favoritism, and strategic decisions, not effort. As Machiavelli said, the promise given was a necessity of the past. The word broken is a necessity of the present. Employers make empty promises to keep employees motivated, only to betray them when it's convenient. The result? An exhausted, overworked, and obedient workforce. 3. Relationships. Psychological warfare on a personal level. The same power games that rule politics and business exist in personal relationships as well. Toxic individuals, whether in romantic relationships, friendships, or families, use dark psychological tactics to control, manipulate, and dominate those around them. Gaslighting, making someone doubt their own reality so they become dependent on the manipulator's version of the truth. Guilt tripping, using emotional blackmail to make others feel obligated to comply with their demands. Love bombing and withdrawal, overloading someone with attention and affection, then suddenly pulling away to make them desperate for approval. Silent treatment, using withdrawal and silence as a weapon to create anxiety and force submission. Creating false dependency, making the victim believe they can't survive without them, ensuring control. These tactics are not random. They are carefully crafted psychological weapons. A toxic person doesn't want partnership. They want dominance. Machiavelli described it best when he said, "Men are so simple and so much creatures of circumstance that the deceiver will always find someone ready to be deceived." The result? A relationship built on power, not love. The victim feels trapped, but they don't realize it was never love. It was control all along. Now the real question is, what do you do with this knowledge? Do you use it to manipulate others? To seize power at any cost? To become the very thing we fear? Or do you use it to protect yourself? To recognize manipulation when you see it? To avoid being a pawn in someone else's game? The choice is yours. But remember this: power is never neutral. It is always in play. And those who do not understand it will always be at the mercy of those who do. If you want to keep uncovering the hidden truths about psychology, power, and the mind, subscribe now. Because here, we don't just tell stories. We reveal the game. And once you see the game, you can never unsee it.